All right, we are live, and we're live here on three different platforms: TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. And we are doing a thing. I'm going to be answering questions and answers from you. If you've got a question, you can go ahead and put it in the comments. And we will do that. We've got a wonderful moderator, DJ, who is helping find all of your comments on all of the different platforms and pass them along. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the comments, and I'm going to be answering as many of those as possible. I'm Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor, and love to spend time on here just talking with you and answering comments. A lot of people end up with comments about the Bible or about how to maintain being a Christian in the midst of the world in which we live. And yeah, I am right now looking for my comment channel on Discord. But go ahead and post those comments for us, and we will be getting to those right away. You can find it on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, and it looks like we've got an error with the camera. So, of course, that happens. sound. All right. If we have not been able to fix the sound, we're going to have to go a different. Oh, great. DJ says we've got the sound. Okay. So let me tell you about the Gospel of Mary. So the Gospel of Mary is interesting. A lot of people will talk about the Gospel of Mary and in terms of why it's not in the Bible. Often it's paired with the Gospel of Thomas. There's a lot of misinformation out there about the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Thomas that they'll say that they're not in the Bible because Constantine decided they weren't going to be in the Bible at the Council of Nicaea. That's just not true. We have the records from the Council of Nicaea. They didn't talk about that at all. And so the question is, why aren't they in the Bible? Well, in the early 100s, we have something called the Muratorian Fragment, and that piece of text actually. Part of it lists the books of the Bible that are of the New Testament that are being used widely that early, and it's almost all the books of the New Testament except for a couple. I think Hebrews, Jude, Revelation, but almost all of the Bibles, books of the New Testament, were agreed upon very, very early on. And the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary were not in that list. So they weren't being considered as legitimate tellings of the story of Jesus. And it's important to note, too, that that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that are in the New Testament, that those Gospels are not eyewitness accounts. Right. Amy Jill Levine says it this way. I think I was talking to her the other day, and she said, when you're reading the Gospels, it's really important that you understand that what they are doing, the people who are writing them, are trying to tell the early movement of Christianity, sort of define what they believe, how they want to live in the world. And they are crafting these stories about Jesus in order for that purpose. And so when you read them, you've got to read them with that purpose. And so very early on, these four gospels were widely distributed, were widely circulated. The Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary were written a lot later, and were not widely circulated because the people right then at that early time, basically, if they were accurate, if they were what they believed, if they were what happened, they would have been circulated like the rest, but they weren't, because that's not how people viewed them. And actually, by the time we have that Muratorian Fragment in the early 100s, they're almost completely out of circulation. So I hope that helps. Now, if you have a question, you can put it in the comments in TikTok or YouTube or Instagram, and our wonderful moderator DJ is going to help us. With that. Going to help us find your comments and help me answer it in here. While she's doing that, I'm just going to scan really quickly and see if we've got any. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Here's one from TikTok. I asked about Pastor Jeremy's thoughts on David Bentley Hart. Now, so David, I am not super familiar with him, and his work. I've heard of him, but I know he's a philosopher, but I don't know enough about what he says to give you an accurate answer. If you've got something that he has talked about that you would like me to respond to, go ahead and put that in the comment there, and we will get to it as we are able to see that. Let's see. I'm seeing on Instagram one big question from me is why so many Christians struggle to get by financially when Matthew 6 talks about even the birds of the air have their needs taken care of. Yeah, so um, this is problematic on a number of different levels. The idea of human struggle is something that is talked about a lot in the Bible because the Bible was written to people who definitely struggled financially and otherwise. Um, and it's important to say that in the context of so in Matthew chapter 6, that is in the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is talking there about worrying. He's talking about why are you worrying about tomorrow? He says, for tomorrow will take care of itself. And part of what he's doing there is is trying to is trying to put an ethic out there that is, we're just going to be about the work that we have to do in the world today. We're going to be fully present in this moment, and when we see things going on in the world, we are going to respond to those things. We're not going to spend our whole lives trying to fast forward and make and make the future our focus. The focus needs to be the present. But it's the other thing that's really important is to say that Jesus does not make the assertion that if you follow him, your life will be easier. He doesn't assert that if you follow him, you're going to have less conflict, that you're going to have better things financially, that Christians will prosper in that way. That idea that God preferences Christians over other people for things like financial blessing is part of something called the prosperity gospel, and it's in no way in line with the teachings of Jesus. In fact, most of the places or many places, Jesus will say, look, if you follow me, it's going to be hard. You are going to struggle. Um, and so, um, and so what that like, don't, that God's going to provide, God provides for the birds of the air, and God will provide for you. It's in the context of not worrying and being fully present in this moment. That's not a perfect answer. It's not a great answer. It's definitely not a comforting answer, but that's the one I got. All right. From Instagram, J Moore something says, how do you approach discussions with people who are anti-LGBTQ from a biblical perspective? Thanks for this. It's important when we're talking about people who are not affirming, to sort of ask ourselves the question: is this person a person that I'm trying to continue to be in a relationship with? Right? Is this a dear friend, a trusted family member? Right? Is that this person? Um, if so, then we need to really lean into how we have this conversation. If not, then it's important to just say, look, if you're not trying to maintain a relationship with this person is not an important person in your life, at some point, maybe sooner rather than later, is probably going to be one of these people that it's time to move on and let them go in peace. But a lot of the times when we are having these conversations, they're with people that we love and care about. And so one of the pieces that's really important is when it's somebody that we're in a long-term relationship with, that we want to continue being in a relationship with. We need to remember that we're going to see them again, right? And the very first thing that I tell people, and I've coached a bunch of people through this process, is you need to think of it in terms of having 1,000 conversations and not just one conversation, right? You can't you can't turn someone from this like deeply held belief that has been reinforced over and over again, probably by different pastors and different people who are in authority. You're not going to be able to turn that in um, in one conversation. So instead, you start with like a very surface level conversation, right? Some very like small things, and remember one small thing, one little observation that you're going to make, and you're not going to get into the depth of like the Bible and all of those things until a little bit later. You did though ask about the Bible particularly. And one of the things that's important with what's known as the clobber passages, the 6 or so passages of people who say that being LGBTQ is a sin mention, is that you've got to find where they are um, finding that interpretation, right? Because first and foremost, you've got to have legitimate scholars that you're interacting with. A random person is not their opinion and their basic, surface level reading of a text is not the same as a biblical scholar's interpretation of the text. Some really great ones that you can look for online that are very accessible. Pete Enns, Dan McClellan, they are fantastic. They are brilliant. Uh, and so we are so you need to make sure we're talking about legitimate biblical scholars. And one thing you might do is watch the movie 1946, the movie. It's a documentary of how the word homosexuality first got into the Bible in 1946. It's not always been there. I've got a verse by verse video if you just want a little bit more insight into like what these verses mean. But if this is a person that has that sort of deeply held belief, you don't start there, right? You start at a much more surface level, small observations, a little comment here or there whenever you see them, until you get to a place where you're sort of getting deeper and deeper in conversation. The other thing that is, and I should say, sometimes we're talking about the fact that like our queer kid came out to us and they are surrounded that maybe a family member is not affirming and it is potentially saying harmful things. In that setting, what I say is like, look, that the belief that you have is something that can really hurt my kid. For example, kids who are rejected, LGBTQ kids who are rejected by their religious family members are twice as likely to try to unalive themselves. And so the request is like, can you just not discuss that with them? Right. I would really appreciate it because it could really hurt them. And I know that you don't want to hurt them. And the other thing that is important is to help them shift their perspective is to invite them to be encouraging, saying, the real thing that my kid needs is encouragement. They're trying to form their identity, and having you be a positive voice in their life could be really helpful. So, whenever you see them, could you try to look at something and find something that you think is good or admirable about them? Just every time you see them, say like, you know what? You're a really great friend. I'm really proud of you for that. Things like that. So that's a start. I hope that helps. Now we have Escher's hand on YouTube. Do you believe that the historical Jesus is God, or that he is a son of God but subordinate, or that he was adopted, or that he was a magician, or a proto-feminist, or a Jewish zealot, or what? Generally wanting to know where you stand on the scholarly debates slash theories of the historical Jesus. So first off, I'll tell you that I don't I don't share my personal beliefs on this kind of thing. Um, when there is a sort of active discussion, because I'm a pastor. My goal is to help people try to find the religious beliefs and practices that work for them, the beliefs that help them become the best version of themselves, the belief that helps them find a purpose greater than themselves, and the beliefs uh, that help them experience transcendence. And when a pastor in a question like this, where there's this wide range of scholarly debate, when a pastor says, "Well, this is what I believe," it puts the weight of that pastor and the weight of that relationship with that pastor behind a specific belief, behind a specific position that is not universally or even widely held. And so, when somebody says, well, when they're trying to consider this, and they look at the belief that the pastor they respect has, and they say, well, I don't believe that. There's an additional issue there, that there's a sort of loyalty to that pastor, to that relationship, that complicates them being able to choose the belief that actually works for them. And so that's why I don't give that. I will offer in my videos like scholarly consensus. I will offer a range of different viewpoints when I know those, but I don't give my own sort of personal endorsement of a specific belief. Uh, Sorry about that. So. Because and this is important. This is the difference between me and somebody like Dan McClellan. Dan McClellan is a scholar. He's trying to assert a specific viewpoint. My goal is to help people find beliefs. So we have sort of different roles in the world. We're answering questions. If you've got a question, go ahead and put it in the comments. That would be great. We're going to answer as many as we can in the time that we have. On TikTok, Dear Abby, do you believe that Paul wanted another less restrictive religion and therefore made Jewish prophecy, I think is what you meant, work to fit this narrative? I first off, I'm not Paul. Second, there is no indication of that sort of an intent from Paul in the text. It appears that what Paul was trying to do is trying to establish a movement. Paul was really sure that Jesus was coming back like the next day. You get that he wasn't just like thinking that, oh, maybe 2,000 years. Like, no, it's the next day. And so Paul's focus was on trying to get the message about Jesus out to as many people as possible. You get a little bit of an indication in his later works that he might be shifting that perspective and realizing maybe that he is more forming a longer term movement, but that's really not in his mind. And so while it is possible, because there is nothing in the text to address what you asked directly, there is also nothing. There's nothing to really indicate that. In fact, what is there indicates sort of something a little bit different. All right, I'm answering your questions. One of the questions people will ask me is, "Where am I a pastor?" And my answer is actually right here. This is my full-time job. I'm ordained in the United Methodist Church, and I have this digital platform where I am a pastor. That's why I offer pastoral appointments. You can actually go to my go to my profile and schedule time with me. Um, there's an intentional community that we have called Not Church. Not Church is like church. Somebody said it's like church, but but there's we talk about spiritual things. We process our own religious history. We are there for people in hard times, for each other in hard times. Uh, so they say it's all the things that they wanted from church, except people aren't judging them for having a tarot deck on their side table. And everybody there's people of all kinds of different religious identities and non-identities who are all there focusing on growing and understanding spirituality, forming beliefs and practices that work for them. And it's really beautiful. I'll be honest, I don't really experience in the rest of the world what I experienced in this Not Church group, right? Like people will come with their own perspective that I know is very different than the perspective of somebody else. And and while in the normal world that person would be arguing, they always take a picture, this posture of learning where they're like, oh, that's an interesting phrase. Can you explain what you mean when you talk about God like that? It's really beautiful. Now, most everybody in there has experienced religious trauma, especially around being manipulated out of money. So we don't ask for donations. Everything we do is pay for what you get. That's how I fund the work that we do. So if you want to be part of Not Church, it's $3 a month, and uh, and and what we say is like, if it doesn't work for you, it's fine. You just stop paying. But we're also not going to be part of a systemic injustice of capitalism where only people with expendable income have access. If $3 is too much for you, that's okay. Just message me and we'll find a way to get you in for free. All right, another question from Escher's Hand. Before I was in the United Methodist Church, which denomination did you belong to? When I was born, and my parents were part of the Lutheran Church. We very early on went to the United Methodist Church. It was in the deep South, though, and one of the things, one of the attributes down there is that almost every church down there is a sort of evangelical, it's fundamentalist church. You go to a Southern Baptist church or a United Methodist church when I was growing up, and they would look the exact same. They would be very much in this evangelical world. And then I also was very involved in other churches, non-denominational things, Bible studies, all kinds of things. Just absolutely wild. I actually tell a bunch of those stories in my book, How to Not Suck as a Christian, because I also tell about how I suck as a Christian. I'm kind of an expert in it. So, yeah. Okay. From TikTok, KK. As someone who grew up in the Southern Bible Belt, you've helped me find the truth of Jesus. KK, thank you so much. You have no idea how much that comment means to me. As you can imagine, creators like me get a lot of really hateful comments. And so the positive comments really do matter. So if you ever think, mate, should I post this? Yes, you should. You should always be kind because there's a lot of hate out there. All right. B Marie I think on Instagram. How do you recommend instilling more open so at what age slash how do you recommend instilling more open opinion slash less absolutism in our children who naturally think in absolutes? This is a great question. I've actually got some training in developmental psychology and have written some books that help people, religious people, understand the different sort of ways that the human mind develops over time. And you're right. The younger a kid is, the more concrete their thinking is. But concrete doesn't have to mean uh, open, less open, right? Because you can be concrete. You can help them form those concrete beliefs um, around ideas that you think are universal, like God loves everybody. And so, since God loves everybody, we should treat everybody the way, in a loving way, right? You can teach them um, that God allows people to have different opinions, different thoughts, and that's okay. And so, when somebody thinks differently than you, it's okay. Um, so we can start talking in those ways from a young age. We can also model that in the way that we interact with them. Um, so respecting their opinions and their ideas and having a conversation about it and asking them what they think, and if they think something, why they think that. Now, those can be very hard the younger they are, but as they grow older, again, that sort of respect, we can model that openness in the way that we engage with our children, so that when they do begin to break out of that concrete operational thought and begin to progress more and more, these are new ideas. We haven't been telling them black and white the whole time. We've been priming them with these sort of more open, loving, and respectful beliefs. All right. Just a big shout out to DJ. She is a moderator. She's moderating. She's finding all your comments on all the different platforms: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and bringing them here. She actually has a question. What is the scholarly consensus on universal salvation? Um, I would say that there is not scholarly consensus. Now, let me tell you what DJ's meaning about universal salvation. Universal salvation, and there's several different sort of types or approaches to it, but it's the idea that um, that in Christianity, that through the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, that everyone is saved, that everyone is going to heaven, however you want to say that, and and that's done in a bunch of different ways. One of them is to say that Jesus, the power of Jesus' life and death and resurrection was not bound by anything. There was nothing that was more powerful than that, including human choice. And so that's just sort of applied to everybody. But yeah, there's not actually a scholarly consensus on that, DJ. Thanks for asking that question. I can tell you that there are videos by people like Pete Enns and Dan McClellan that can help you explore that a little bit more, as well as the podcast Data Over Dogma. Do you have resources for parents who are deconstructing and also trying to recognize that their beliefs have caused harm to their children? Hmm. Yeah, I feel that. Oh my gosh. I feel that. On the deconstructing front, um, I'm a person who likes data. Um, I've written a book called How to Not Suck as a Christian. That could help there. Um, uh, Dan McClellan has a book, The Bible Tells Me So. It's a really great book. If you really want to go just into a great scholarly text about the Bible, The History of the Bible by John Barton. You can find links to all of those I've got a link in my profile for an Amazon list. Um, and uh, and yeah, there's also a book, and I'm not sure I haven't encountered something personally that addresses the parent in the belief, the damaging beliefs that you've passed down. Um, I There is a really great book called Growing With that comes from a huge study that was done that can help you understand the kinds of ways to approach your kids in a healthy way. It'll help them stay engaged with faith and spirituality, and maybe even the church. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you. I need to do some research on that. Instum, I can't say your name. How do you tell your parents, uh, your pastor who's been a friend for 30 years, that you are moving away from corporate church because of your own growth, not because he is the problem? Um, yeah, that. So I would say, as a pastor, and I see that River asked, "Am I a pastor?" Yes, I'm a pastor. I'm ordained in the United Methodist Church, got a Master of Divinity degree, all this kind of stuff. But as a pastor, I can tell you that many pastors um, understand that at a really deep level. Many pastors have felt the same way, wanted to leave the institutional church. That, however, is their profession and their training. And so um, either they feel stuck, or some of them have decided to sort of try to enact change from within. And so I would just say, my guess is they've had an impact on your life and an impact on you growing to this point. And so I would just start with that. Say, I just wanted to let you know something that's going on in my life. You've been a huge help in helping me understand God and my relationship with God, and I've continued to grow and go from there. So I hope that helps. Uh, so on TikTok, does your church have a live stream? I would love to watch your sermons. You are watching my live stream for my church, the digital church that I pastor. It's called the Numa Community. We have a bunch of different things. We have Not Church, which is our like an intense community where people are supporting each other. It's like what you experienced in church. The support, the discussion, learning, people getting relationships with people of similar values without the judgment. Um, we have a podcast called Unbelief. I do daily spiritual content here on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and but we don't do like a worship service with a person in their guitar. Um, but if you're looking for like a longer form content from me, you can go to the Unbelief podcast. Just search for Unbelief wherever you find podcasts. I actually just released about a 30-minute teaching. We're working through the book of Ruth, and the book of Ruth is all kinds of sexy, right? It would definitely be a TVMA or an R-rated thing, and the what we talk about today's episode is the sex scene in the Book of Ruth. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. All right, TikTok, Miguel Watioka. Do you think omniscient omniscience and free will can coexist? Yeah, so Miguel, that's a really great question. So omniscience is the idea that God knows everything. And because God knows everything, that God knows all the choices that you will make. And if God knows all the choices that you will make, and omnipotence, right? God can is all powerful, could change those choices, then that means that you don't have free will. Um, here's what I here's how I approach that with people. This is actually a chapter in my book, How to Not Suck as a Christian. Um, so when we're talking about God and spirituality, we're talking about a being that exists in a reality beyond our reality, right? That is bigger than our reality, bigger than our human experience, and which means it's bigger than our human language and our human system of logic. And so there are many times in spirituality when you're trying to talk about and describe that reality that exists in a bigger sense beyond our reality, beyond our experience, and maybe you might even say like a reality that exists beyond and includes our reality. Um, you can't fully describe it, right? Logic breaks down because you are using something that is bound to something smaller to describe something bigger. And so there's this concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you have two ideas in your brain that seem to contradict, two beliefs that you have seem to contradict. And our brain is wired to remove that dissonance, right? To create a single narrative, a single story, to find a way to make them work together, to do, and in this case, to do all sorts of like mental gymnastics to work it out. Um, uh, but in cognitive dissonance is a useful feature in our everyday life, and when you're, when this was being wired into our brains and you were being chased by a lion or whatever, it's not really helpful. This attribute of our brain isn't really helpful when we're talking about spirituality. And so what I encourage people to do is to get comfortable with cognitive dissonance, right? If you find two things that seem to be very true, and yet if you continue down those paths and if you take them both to their logical conclusions, they seem to contradict. You can just say, these don't ultimately make sense, but they both seem true. Like when I put them in my life and I live according to them, both of them are true. So I'm just going to hold both of these beliefs, and I'm going to just hold a question mark in between them as to how they interact. If you can get comfortable with cognitive dissonance, it can be a wonderful thing. Thanks for that question. I hope that helps. This is TikTok medical writing mentor. I'm new here. Forgive my ignorance, but what are you skeptical of with regards to religion? I'm skeptical of everything. Let me explain that. Sometimes people hear skeptic and think like you don't believe. Like, oh, I'm skeptical of that guy, what that guy says, and a lot of times the people are meaning like I don't believe what that guy says. But being a skeptic is really about data, and so that means that I want to base my religious beliefs, my beliefs everywhere. I'm a skeptic in all areas of my life on reliable data. And so when you're talking about any specific field, right, you want reliable data from that field. So if you're talking about geology, you're going to look for the data from geologists. If you are looking for biology, you're going to get data from biologists. You're not going to try to use geologist data to explain biology, right? Religion is another field of study like science. And so when you're talking about religion, you're looking for reliable data from that. And there's lots of different subcategories like biblical studies, and you want biblical scholars. And so for me, I try to pay attention to all the data and base my beliefs on that data. Some beliefs are really strong. Like when I came in and I sat down in this chair, I didn't think that I was going to float off of it because I have very strong belief in gravity, right? And I have lots of belief in that. But what being a skeptic means, and I think maybe the most fundamental aspect is a deep belief in the fact that you are wrong. You just don't know what you're wrong about, right? And so if I am wrong, I'm always allowing new data to come in. I'm allowing myself to evaluate it and incorporate it or dismiss it based on whatever it is. And it means that though I can get more data and realize that this thing that I was pretty sure about, I was wrong about. So I hope that helps. Okay. On TikTok, that's too deep. Are you a liberal gay type pastor? I am not straight, and I would say I'm liberal. So, yeah. On TikTok, River, does Scripture ever support believers graduating in spiritual maturity from the local church? Well, this is an interesting question because local church carries with it an institution that does not exist in the New Testament, right? There was no church in the New Testament. There were gatherings of people that were at people's houses, um, and so um, yeah. Now I can say that you do see lots of examples in the Bible um, of people growing into new beliefs, discovering new things about God and about themselves. Sometimes those beliefs are sort of incorporated into the beliefs of that culture. Sometimes those beliefs lead them into a different place. um, uh, so there's not a really clear, definitive answer there, but I hope that helps. On TikTok, Elizabeth Sellers photo. How do you balance your skepticism with your personal relationship with a loving creator? I'm going to answer that, but my camera stopped working. So give me just a second.